Well, I think if you talk about city planning and looking at what the conference is about, I think you should look at that concept a bit broader than just the planning. I think if you talk about city planning, you cannot forget about the city's vision. And I think that's where city planning begins. It's the mayors, city managers need to have a vision for their city, for the future. It was already mentioned, political leaders move out every 4 or 5 years, but city planning is much longer. So I think for city planning, one of the issues is that you really need to plan your city according to the long-term vision that was set by a broader consensus of political parties rather than a small party managing a city for 4 years and then the next one comes along. So that issue of city planning is to have a longer-term perspective. And with that longer-term perspective, I think it needs to be very inclusive. It was mentioned a couple of times. It's the holistic approach that we think is best to use for city planning, urban development. So with city planning, it's not only about the buildings and the construction of the roads, but it's also about planning the places in between. So where people live and where they speak and where they socially interact, because that's where you get the knowledge sharing, that's where you get the innovation. So for city planning, I think one is the longer term perspective, and two is how do you manage the spaces in between, not only the concrete, but how do you plan the people, how they move around, where they socially interact, where they innovate, and where they just have fun living in a city. Best practices is something that would imply that if you implement a best practice, you'd be best in class. With best practices, my take is you get to mediocrity. Because if everyone implements the same best practice, then everyone will be on the same level at par and nobody is trying to achieve more. So I would rather talk about best options. And best options take into consideration the social context of a city and the cultural aspects of a city and a country. So rather than talking about best practices as a single thing, it's the best options where people can pick and choose, and the mayors and city managers can say, this is relevant to my situation, this is not, but here is a good element that we can use here, and this is a good element there. So I'd like to talk about options. And then if you look at what some of the things are that we're not discussing today, it was referred to very briefly, is we talk about urbanization. But thinking about what the next wave might be is ruralization. And I think in Europe you see examples already where in Denmark and Sweden we see that people are moving out of the cities and looking to live in a more rural area, which is directly connected to the city. So they have both the city life where they can dwell and where they can work and consume culture and tourism. But on the other end, they can live in a rural area where they have the greeneries around them and enjoy their livability. So I think ruralization is something which might sound contradictory to urbanization, but it's something that should be planned simultaneously.